The Prime Minister is in Nunavut this hour. Justin Trudeau is with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, highlighting Canada's priority to protect the Arctic. This was their arrival earlier in the north. The two toured a military facility in Cambridge Bay and are now heading to the Canadian High Arctic Research Station. They are there with Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly and Defense Minister Anita Anand. This week's visit comes amid pressure to upgrade the continent's defenses in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's also the first by a NATO Secretary General to the Canadian Arctic since the military alliance was founded in 1949 to protect against the Soviet Union. The CBC's Peter Cowan is tracking this story for us live from our nation's capital. Hey, Peter, so what's the purpose of this visit?
This is a visit that a lot of people were not expecting to even happen maybe even a year ago for a couple of reasons. Canada has always kind of kept NATO away from the Arctic, and that's for a number of reasons. One was they didn't want to provoke Russia. But with Russia's invasion of Ukraine 6 months ago, that sort of risk equation has changed. The other concern is around sovereignty. Canada has wanted to exert its own control over the Arctic rather than having other countries having input into how it's protected. We're looking there at a live shot at the community center in Cambridge Bay. This is one of the activities that the Prime Minister and the Secretary General are participating in. It's a hudlik lighting ceremony, the traditional Inuit lamp. This is going to take place before they head to the research centre to learn a little bit more about some of the academic work being done in Canada's Arctic. Because one of the discussions is around climate change, how it affects Canadian Arctic, and how it affects defence of Canada. Topics that are part of the discussion. We heard earlier today, in fact, just in the last hour or so, from the Deputy Prime Minister about the importance of this trip right now.
The Prime Minister and the NATO Secretary General chose that part of their itinerary very intentionally to highlight Canada's commitment to the North and to highlight Canada's commitment to Arctic security. In our budget in April, we meaningfully increased our spending on defense, and Canada is very committed to defending our Arctic and to working closely with our NATO allies.
So pointing out there that some of this is optics, Canada wanting to show this commitment and the fact that, NATO now is going to have more of an involvement there when it comes to the defense of Canada.
And Peter, we were looking at live images of the Prime Minister and the NATO Secretary General, and we want to bring our viewers back there. And as you mentioned, this is a symbolic lighting ceremony. So we'll just listen in for a moment as we continue to cover this story.
And the oil that lights, that keeps the wick lit, is seal or whale blubber, which is round until it's a liquid, and then that's used to keep the kulak lit. And the kulak is always tended to and in a certain way so that there's no black smoke that comes from the igloo. Our elders, and to our community members, and I'll turn it over to Eva.
Welcome to my igloo. It's a bit tall, but it's okay. Welcome to Cambridge Bay. I'm Kakpalak. I'm one of the younger elders in this house, along with my beautiful sisters and brothers out there. I'd like to tell a little story about why I love to light the kulak. I'm the adopted child of a family that wanted to have another child in their time, 72 years ago. I was born in an igloo. a beautiful birthing place that I call today every day when I see one. And my grandmother, well, she's my grandmother and my adoptive mom. God rest her soul. She taught me how to light the kulak, because winters were so long in the winter, and that was the only way that they can heat up our kettles and pots to cook our meal, for daily meals. So I've enjoyed my time with lighting the kulak for people in the community that always asked for me to do. I'm shaking. I'm not like this. There must be important people. There must be important people in here all watching me.
I've learned that whoever lights the kulak is the most important person in the room.
It's supposed to be one of those really people that supposed to light the kulak with her ease and everything, so the kulak will light properly and work for me. But having these special people is important, and I think I'm more shaker than my kulak. Thank you so kindly.
It looks perfect.
But I love lighting the kulak. It's beautiful. My adoptive mom light this for me every day, like I said before, to heat up our meals, our daily foods. And I've learned to watch daily from when I started watching her light the kulak early wee hours in the morning when we travel from place to place in the winter time with dog team. So this kulak always brings memories of my childhood, and I would love, and I love to teach it to the youth, the children, who will always be by me and ask me to light the kulak just to see what it's like. So thank you so much, and you may continue, and welcome to Cambridge Bay.
And we were watching there. It's a symbolic and cultural lighting ceremony in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. You can see Prime Minister Justin Trudeau along with the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. This is, of course, live images that we're looking at of the visit up north, and this is part of a 3-day visit by the NATO Secretary General, the first really of its kind that we've seen in this country, of a NATO Secretary General to the Canadian Arctic. And of course, you can see Peter Cowan has joined me now, and we were discussing the itinerary behind this trip. This, of course, is one of those opportunities to see both of the leaders of of NATO and of our Prime Minister, but also, of course, one of the topics they'll be talking about, as you outlined, was Arctic sovereignty. So let's talk a little bit about what Canada has committed to, is doing.
Yeah, and I think this particular stop is important on this trip because as much as they want to show off the military hardware, Defence of Canada's North is also dependent on the Inuit people who are living in those communities. The Canadian Rangers, for example, who are there and an important part of that. When we look at the investment in terms of the hardware, Canada has committed several $billion over the next few years to modernize its NORAD defenses. For example, talking about new surveillance equipment throughout the north in order to detect incoming threats. This is something where the equation has changed over the last 6 months. We heard that from the Defense Minister, Anita Anand, yesterday, saying, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we can't just rely on Canada's geography to say, look, we've got a big area with not a lot of people, no one's going to try and invade it. So we don't really need to protect it all that well. So that's changed the equation. Canada is now investing several $billions over the next year. They've outlined a 20-year, $40 billion plan to help with Canadian sovereignty, more investments over the next few years, trying to up the military spending. There's been pressure from other NATO countries, especially the United States, for example, to increase that spending in line with the 2% of GDP, the commitment that all NATO countries have made.
Thanks for this, Peter. That is the CBC's Peter Cowan in Ottawa. And for more analysis on the NATO Secretary General's trip to Canada, we reached Timothy Choi. He's at the University of Calgary's Centre for Military Security and Strategic Studies. I asked him for his take on Stoltenberg's visit.
So clearly, I don't think this would have happened. This visit wouldn't have happened were it not for Russia's further invasion of Ukraine. I expect Stoltenberg to have possibly visited and to discuss our new climate change center for excellence, but definitely not going all the way up to Cambridge Bay and some of the other sites to visit the Canadian Arctic, most remote regions. And of course, all of this comes down to what is the core of NATO. NATO was designed to ensure America's ability to provide support to Europe in the event of a Russian invasion. And we're really sort of seeing this now. It's about being able to ensure that North America, with Canada obviously a major part of it, be able to serve as that assured home base for sending reinforcements across the North Atlantic to Europe. So, NATO needs North America to be really a sort of fortress that is secure from any sort of outside threat. And of course, as Peter noted earlier, traditionally Canada, did not really want NATO to be involved in the Arctic because that would go against our general policy, which was more or less shared by the other Arctic states. And there's the policy of cooperating with the Russians on so-called soft security issues like climate change, fisheries protection, search and rescue, that kind of thing. So, of course, the recent invasion, obviously that's changed a lot now. And even Putin himself has apparently in Russian media threatened the use of military force, and he didn't exclude nuclear, against North America to prevent us from sending assistance to Ukraine or other parts of Europe in future conflicts. And right now he's going all in on, this seeing NATO countries as the bad guys. And there is very little more that we could do or not do that would really assuage him in this regard.
Timothy, we saw back in June that the Defence Minister, Anita Anand, committed Canada to spending nearly $5 billion over the next several years on updating NORAD, the Joint Military Command with the United States. That's the amount, but what about the timeline? How long could that take? Yeah,
so that's the first $5 billion of a total of $38 billion that we're going to spend over the next apparently 20 years or so. And of course, we don't have a timeline for these projects. We don't know exactly, how long they'll take to build all these new radar sites and supporting equipment and items. So, how long will it take? It'll take a long time. One of the questions you could ask is, are we doing enough? For us to say that we are doing enough, we would have had to literally go back in time and invest billions of dollars nearly a decade ago just to have the equipment we need today for us to say that we are currently doing enough.
That is Timothy Choi from the University of Calgary.